Good afternoon, Dr. Ewell. This is Crystal Hypes, MBE 580. My project is about Sleeping Beauties. It is a book, and this is the analysis of the supply chain of that book, as well as recommendations for repairing any issues found within that supply chain. I apologize if you hear any dogs barking in the background. I have 5 of them, so hopefully it's not too bad. As stated, this project was about the novel Sleeping Beauties by Stephen King and Owen King. The novel was published in September of 2017. The authors are related. The authors have their own publishing company that they have been a part of, at least Stephen King has been a part of for many, many years, and that's Scribner Publishing. And Scribner is actually a subsidiary of Simon and Schuster Publishing, which is the parent company and does all of the printing and distribution for the Scribner Publishing brand. So when I was looking at the breakdown of the supply chain for this novel, it came to me that there were 2 distinct supply chains. There was a creative supply chain that encompassed all of the people functions at the very beginning. So all of the creativity that came along with the thought, the writing, the editing, and the people functions of that. And then there was the physical supply chain. Physical supply chain has to do with the paper and the binding, the distribution, the logistics, the trucking, the warehousing, things like that. The next step is sales, obviously getting that book out to the public, and then recycling and final disposition, making sure that that book is, and in the book industry, it's actually a very robust, pardon me, it's actually a very robust recycling and final disposition cycle, because a book is basically able to be reused innumerable times. So let's get into the creative supply chain. As I got into the creative supply chain, I thought about all of those things that one would need to do and all the steps that are needed in a creative supply chain in order to get to a point where a physical supply chain can take over and a product can be completed and made and put out to market. So in the creative supply chain, there are what I think of as 4 steps. First, someone has to have an idea. Then they have to, of course, write that idea out into a novel. They have to edit that novel so that it is not, some sort of horrible state in perpetuity. It has to be legible. It has to be readable. It has to be friendly. Then it would go to their agent, and an agent typically is the middleman, and then on to the publisher. And I found this great graphic from Thad McElroy, who writes about publishing. And in this instance, he was writing about the life cycle of publishing. And so you'll see in several slides, I do have information about the life cycle of publishing from him, basically going through, the writer and the author's publicity and how those come back together. And then it goes on to the agent and to the editorial staff to be able to make sure that this is a good finished product for the next step in the process, which is the actual physical supply chain. So getting into the creative supply chain, first you have to have an idea. And in this picture is the elder Stephen King, who is in his 70s now, and his son Owen King, who is in his 40s. The novel was written collaboratively between Owen and Stephen, and it came first with an idea. So Owen woke up one morning, and although Owen is typically a comedic author, he writes about comedic issues, he woke up one morning and thought, well, what would happen if all of the women in the world never woke up? What if one day all the women in the world don't wake up? And so, because horror is not really the type of book that Owen typically writes, he contacted his father and asked if he would like to take on the idea. And so, not only did Stephen King want to take on the idea, he wanted to partner with his son to create the novel. And so, part of that is the pitch. So, Owen had to pitch to his father, which he states in several articles that I read, that that is something that happens a lot, that his father gets pitches all the time from everybody, random people at the grocery store. Hey, this would be a great idea for a novel. So he was concerned that his father would not even take the pitch. But they ended up working together in a collaboration that has worked out really well, because they ended up with a very long novel that I read and thought was extremely good. So now that you have an idea and you've got a collaboration going, the next step in the creative supply chain is actually writing out that novel, writing it out and editing it. So in this case, the novel is co-written, written by Owen and Stephen King. And part of the fear of that, especially with the two disparate styles that they have, Stephen King is a renowned horror writer. He writes these weird, odd, really unusual, scary things. And Owen King really is not like that. He's very funny and kind of dark humorish. And so those two styles are very disparate. And so how would they create some sort of cohesive, singular novel without sacrificing a bit of who they are? And so they created this 25-page rule. So basically, according to Stephen King, one of them would write 25 pages, leaving gaps for certain scenes, and then the other could rewrite those pages and fill in the missing scenes. So you could write 25 pages and then have the other person come back and rewrite those 25 pages. So eventually it sounds like one solid voice and not two voices trying to be intertwined. And Owen King actually said, I was concerned after I read it. I wanted to make sure it didn't sound like two disparate people. I can see a few places where it sounds like me or where it sounds like Dad, but overall it really does sound like one individual voice. And so after they wrote this novel, they did do dual authorial editing. So they both came back as authors, as co-authors, and edited this novel for the first time through before they actually sent it to their agent. The second step in the creative supply chain is sending to the agent. So an agent really is a very important step in the publishing world. It is extremely difficult to self-publish. If you do self-publish, it's usually a very small publishing house, and there's not a great margin of profit on it for that individual writer. You're usually paying out of pocket to have that book published for yourself and to have it printed. So having an agent that can do the hard work for you is very important. In this case, they use Stephen King's agent, Chuck Verrill, and Chuck Verrill works for Darrensoff and Verrill, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Darrensoff and Verrill are literary agents, and he's been with Verrill for very, very many years. So the agent has three jobs. The first job is to get the publisher on board. So once the agent ensures that the manuscript gets picked up by a publisher, then he has to make sure that it actually gets published, because having a publisher buy the manuscript or agree to take the manuscript is one thing, but actually getting it published is something completely different. So ensuring that not only does it get picked up by a publisher, but it actually hits the market is also the agent's job. And the agent is there to make sure that the author gets paid. Without the agent, there is no payment for the author, because the author has no way to get that money directly from the publisher. And again, if you are an author and you're single, you're not out there with an agent, your margins are going to be very, very low compared to what an agent can get you. And especially in this case with Sleeping Beauties, with the caliber of writer that Stephen King is and that Owen King is, their margins would be higher because they have guaranteed sales. As soon as this thing came out, it was a bestseller, and so the publishing house knows that. In the case of Sleeping Beauty, Stephen King already had a publishing house that he worked with on a regular basis, and that would be Scribner. Once you've passed the agent stage and the agent has gotten the book to the publisher, in this case Scribner, which is a subsidiary of Simon and Schuster, has 3 jobs. The first job is editing. So the editing process, according to a gentleman named Mr. Underdown, answers the following questions. How can the manuscript realize its full potential, and are there problems to fix or polishing needed? So we don't want to change the novel from what its original intent was by the author, but we want to make sure that it is fixed. And so the first editing pass through is smoothing the final product. And then a copy editor comes in and corrects the grammatical, spelling, and other technical errors throughout the document. The next job of the publisher is to ensure that the author's vision is met. So making sure that the editing does not alter the author's vision to a point where it cannot be what it was intended to be. The final job of the publisher is art direction. Art direction in a case like this is vital. So for a hard copy book, which is what this is because the paperback I do not believe has come out yet, but for the hard copy book of Sleeping Beauties, that image on the front cover, beautiful, haunting woman with a moth for eyes, blues, it tells you something about the story. It tells you about the attitude and the feeling that's going to be in this novel, and it sets the mood, and it tells the reader exactly what you're going to get in this novel. So in the creative supply chain, there are lots of potential issues, and being primarily people driven, there are some that are easier potentially to get a handle on than others. And so the first potential issues, of course, being people driven, writer's block, and collaboration issues. So writer's block, we know, is when an author cannot get past a certain point in a novel, cannot get past an idea, cannot even think of an idea. And in this case, we didn't have that issue. Collaboration issues, however, we would have. And part of the collaboration issues, ensuring that there is a good working relationship prior to beginning, that can help solve some of the collaboration issues. There's also the fallacies of individual artists that come into play, and each individual artist has their own ego, and so making sure that each one is being met while working on this novel is important. Fortunately, in this case, they were father-son, and you can't really have any closer bond than that, hopefully. And in that case, they were able to work well together. Another potential issue is agent rejection. So once the book has been written and edited by the authors, then the agent has to agree to take it on. The agent can either choose to publish that book or reject it back to the authors, leaving them to find another route to publication. So a way to better this part of the supply chain is to receive timely and partial submissions to the agent. So instead of waiting until the novel is complete and submitting it as a single manuscript, my suggestion is to submit timely, on-demand, partial submissions to ensure that the agent is on board throughout the writing process so that they are able and willing to sell this to the publisher when that time comes. The third potential issue that I can see in the creative supply chain is the potential for mismatched art concepts. We all know that artists have their own egos as well as novelists and writers. And so the final stage of art direction and copy editing are mostly standard, but in order to have some sort of perfection, or what the artist can perceive as perfection for the cover, the author should have a good amount of input and determination into the art concept. So having Stephen King and Owen King not only there and giving direction, but also determining the final output is vital for translating their vision into the cover art. So all of these actions are people actions, and they rely on emotions and fallible individuals. And changes in this portion of the supply chain can really only be carried out with the knowledge, foresight, and pre-approval of the artists that created the work. And so the publisher also has to be on board to ensure that the novel will sell once it's complete and it's appropriate for mainstream retailers. Now that we've ended the creative supply chain, in this case, Stephen King and Owen King have written the novel Sleeping Beauties. They're now done. They've passed it off to the agent, to the publisher. The publisher has done all of their editing. The art direction is done. They're ready to move on to the physical supply chain. And the physical supply chain, I've broken down into several sections. The first is sourcing and manufacturing. The second is distribution. The third is final distribution and sales, returns, and then finally recycling and used books. And again, Thad McElroy had a great piece of the life cycle of a book. This is the non-half of the non-creative half of this life cycle. Goes from production to sales to distribution and the buyer. This is also a fantastic graphic that I found from three professors who have published this in the Brazilian Journal of Operations and Production Management. This is probably the most comprehensive book publishing supply chain that I could find. And it's very good not only because it has the logistical workings of forward logistics, but also the returns, which is a huge portion of the physical supply chain for a book publisher. And so you work on paper, you have your publishing and your printing, then you go to your distribution, from your national distribution to your regional, and then to your sales outlet. But unfortunately, all along the way, there are returns, and returns can eat, eat, eat the profits alive from any business that's in this distribution chain. So I'm going to break down the physical supply chain into each one of its individual pieces. So the first piece is sourcing. Simon & Schuster uses an electronic data interchange, or EDI, and they drive savings by purchasing their paper products separately, and they have very aggressive contracts with all of the suppliers that they have. And that's something that they've claimed directly, that they have aggressive contracts with the best vendors in the business. They do claim to have a green competitive advantage. They choose to have non-rainforested sources for their papers, so they do get it from forests and recycled content, but they do not have any paper that comes from a protected forest or a rainforest source. And the greening of the supply chain is able to save about 483,000 trees annually and reduce nearly 85 million pounds in greenhouse gases. And they only purchase about 70,000 tons of paper annually. And I say only, that's not even the biggest publisher, biggest printing warehouse in the book industry. So if you can think of 70,000 tons of paper annually, that's a huge amount. But that can't all be gotten from forest, it has to be recycled content as well. In addition to the paper products, they also need glue and stitching to hold the hardcover books together. And these items are not sourced based on the green initiatives found in the sourcing of the paper used in the production runs of the book. But once all the materials have been received, production runs are made based on demands. So the production runs are based on demand, and demand is made by a company called Foresight Forecasting. I believe this is just the brand name of the forecasting model that they use. So it's called Foresight, and they use this, and they use POS system integration from their booksellers, and they use this in a sort of quasi just-in-time manufacturing. So basically what they do is they have detailed account level estimates for all titles at multiple steps in the selling process. And then the process creates this just-in-time manufacturing philosophy to meet immediate needs, but they also have some stock on hand to meet future quick turnaround needs. And this is actually a photo of their floor, their warehouse, where they are manufacturing and stocking the books. And you can see the carousel in the background. They do claim that they have a lot of high-tech machinery that helps them to do this. So they have a lot of forecasting at their hands. Unfortunately, in the book industry in general, it is very difficult to have appropriate forecasting because who knows what's going to be picked up by Oprah, who knows what's going to be, on the next big TV show. Luckily, with this book in particular, with the name Stephen King on it, it is an automatic bestseller, and it literally came out in September or October 2017, and it was on the bestseller list the next week. So we know with Stephen King, he's going to create a huge buzz, and he's going to create a bestseller. So having large amounts of stock on hand up front prior to release date is vital. This is actually one of the biggest issues that I see in the physical supply chain of distribution for Simon and Schuster, which is the fact that they only have one warehouse with distribution capability in the United States. So they have one warehouse in Riverside, New Jersey, and this is an actual schematic of their warehouse. Showing all of their different areas. They build their own pallets, they have conveyor system, they do all their picking and packing here, and they do have a backup warehouse for storage, but they have no distribution capacity in that warehouse. But it's also in the same metro area in Bristol, Pennsylvania. So Riverside, New Jersey and Bristol, Pennsylvania are both in the Philadelphia metro area. And so this is where they ship all of their books to North American booksellers, and they support the international distribution from this one particular warehouse. And the warehouse is fully automated using warehouse management, package control, and transportation systems. And that does help in speed sometimes, but having only one warehouse, I think, is probably the biggest bottleneck and issue that I can see in the supply chain for Simon and Schuster. So in their warehouse, Simon & Schuster does use several technological advances to try to help create a faster, more accurate warehousing system. They use RFID tagging. They have barcoding systems that they apply their own barcodes. They also use conveyor systems, which you saw in that photo of the carousel conveyor. And they use voice picking. Voice picking is actually something that's relatively new for them. So they're using it. I'm not sure that they're using it to their full potential yet, but they are using voice picking apps. So in the physical supply chain, again, for distribution, they do have several different types of order picking. Because they do it all at one warehouse, every order that gets taken into Simon & Schuster has to come out of the same place. So what they do is they create full pallets of everything and they put it away after they've created these full pallets, and they wait for orders to come in. And once the orders come in, they take the full pallets out, and the orders can come in and be a full pallet order. Say, for example, for Amazon, they would order by the pallet. It can be a full case, so cases make up pallets. It can be a partial case or an individual pick. So let's say you wanted 1,157 books, and a pallet came with 1,000 books, and a case had 50. So you would get one pallet, 3 cases, and 7 individual picks. And that would be the way that the picking system would then repackage your order for distribution to you. One of the most interesting things that I found is the fact that they wrap all of their orders and pallets in tamper evident tape. And this is actually a photo of the tamper evident tape that they use, and they're very proud of this tamper evident tape. And I thought, why are they so proud of this tamper evident tape? Because to me, tamper evident tape really means that they're having problems with theft and tampering. And so being able to curtail that issue through a different system of shipping, I think, is a huge possibility for the future. So tamper evident tape really was a red flare for me. Again, this and the next slide, I think, will show you why I think the one warehouse option is probably the worst problem and the worst bottleneck in this entire supply chain. There is a huge difference in shipping times between getting a book to the East Coast and to a West Coast location. So here in the top left corner, the region you can see is the Mid-Atlantic region. So that's where we are. We're in Virginia. You could be serviced by either UPS or less than truckload. And on the left, the order day. So if you order on a Monday, they're processing the order on Monday. They're fulfilling the order Tuesday through Thursday, and they deliver it on one day on Friday. So they can deliver overnight. No matter where you are, it's not going to take any more than 7 days to get your order. And at the bottom, it's got some caveats that, got to have it by noon. We don't have back orders, so it's not going to affect back orders. And they're going to do this 95% of the time. So 95% of the time, you can expect your books within 7 days if you place your order by Tuesday through Friday and they're not there on the weekend. And then you get to the West Coast. So this is the Pacific Northwest region, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. Again, serviced by UPS and less than truckload, but also freight pools. And in this case, that 5 days that you were looking at for the East Coast having a order placed on Monday, that's turned into 12 days. So you're taking an additional week to get that individual order to this individual customer on the West Coast. So you have just created a horrible problem of stockouts, of back orders, of the bullwhip effect. Everything can happen up the chain if it's taking this long to get delivery based on lead time. And especially if you place an order on a Wednesday, you've got 2 weekends in there, and it's taking them forever to fulfill that order and get that out. I think this is probably the worst problem that is in this supply chain. So I also, again, Thad McElroy, probably my favorite person I found when I was researching this entire project, has this great graphic about touches in the life cycle of a book. So talking about printer manufacturer going to the warehouse and then onto the retailer warehouse. So you can either go to the bookstore warehouse or the online retailer. Or you can go directly to an independent bookstore or library. And the chain bookstores goes directly to a book customer, or the online retailer to a book customer. And you can see that in every step of this, there are returns. And it's not just from new book consumers, but also from other players in the chain, including bookstores. For some reason, libraries are not going to return books. I don't know why. I think it probably does happen, especially if they order too many. So the final distribution, how does this book get to its final place? Well, according to the last two charts, they are going through UPS, less than truckload, and freight pools. And they're being distributed through chain bookstores, online resellers, independent bookstores, and libraries. As noted before, there are tons of returns coming through the system at all times. In the book industry, typically, if a book cannot sell fast enough, then that book can be returned back to the publisher in order to not cost that distributor any money. So if the retail salesperson cannot sell that book for a certain period of time, then they'll send it back. And so this happens to be one of the most wasteful and costly aspects of the book industry, according to Book Industry Communications. So unfortunately, that's a total waste of the supply chain if you've got a return. And in some cases, let's say you've got a return of 5 books, you return it back to the publisher, and then 4 months later, somebody wants that book, then you have to order it again. So now you've got a cost of return plus a cost of reshipping and resupply. And that is extremely detrimental to the bottom line, extremely detrimental to the cost of doing business as far as getting that same product in and out. Fortunately, in this instance, Stephen King is a world-renowned author. He is an instant bestseller, and there's very little chance that a number of his books would be returned. So having this product on hand is probably not going to be a bad investment for anyone. Now, this graphic I thought was absolutely fabulous. It is from Book Industry Communications, and it is the returns code. So this is actually the United Kingdom's book group, their national book group, and this is how returns are supposed to be done. So they can either be returned, they're all done through the EDI. They can either be done by to distributor or a trusted third party and either destroyed or put back into the product flow. And if they're destroyed, then they're just pulped and recycled. And on the other end, then the credit is processed and given back to that retailer. Now, again, if that retailer then has to reorder that book in the future, then they're paying again for the same item that they've already returned once. So on the disposition side, recycling and used books is probably one of the more refined pieces of this process. It is exactly taken into account over centuries how books are treated after they've been used. So if you have excess returned stock, then if it cannot be resold, and if it's just hanging out there for a while, then it's going to be pulped. And pulped just means it's remade into the next book. So in this case, however, again, Stephen King, world-renowned best-selling author, probably not getting pulped. Individual readers also have a recycling chain. So their recycling chain can either be made through donation to resellers, and resellers like abebooks.com, which is where I get a lot of my books from. I love going on there. And the donations, I put the Better World books on here because they actually do sell through resellers like abebooks.com. You also have traditional recycling. So according to the earth911.com. Paperback books can be recycled whole, while hardback books have to have the cover removed first. However, the entire thing is biodegradable. However, typically one doesn't find very many books in a recycle bin. And so another route that one can take is to donate these things to the Better World bookstore. And I put on here, which may seem facetious, but it really is not, fire starting. I know that when I have a book that I have gotten, let's say at a yard sale or at a friend's at the library sale for 10 cents, and it's been read to the point where it cannot be read anymore. It's literally falling apart. Pages have come out. The seams are busted. The spine is busted. The glue has come out. I literally use it as fire starting material, or I make my own pulp and put it in the garden. There are many, many potential issues in the physical supply chain, many more than were in the creative supply chain. The physical supply chain is primarily process driven, whereas the creative supply chain was primarily people driven. So let's go through some of these category again by category. So in the category of sourcing and manufacturing, the first potential issue is using a green supply chain as a competitive advantage, relying on the non-rainforest paper supplies. So when I was looking at this, focusing on a green supply chain for paper sourcing may actually mean shortages of paper products, or paper products that are exponentially higher costing and more expensive than rainforest tree paper source. And they also may actually cost extra because you have to pay for extra bleaching for recycled products to eliminate that color differentiation you get with different papers that have been recycled. And this may actually eliminate the green advantage that one was seeking in the first place. So what's a potential solution for this? Focusing on and creating and maintaining relationships with vendors that have similar practices and philosophies. So creating those aggressive contracts that they were talking about with vendors that are not only foresting but replanting, so that you have a continual, although it takes a very long time, a continual chain of forested or foresting materials to be able to use. And you can also utilize recycled materials without worrying about color differentiations. And I know a lot of the time there's specialty paper that's raw or natural that people will pay a lot more for. And being able to use that paper in the printing of a mainstream book may actually not only bring a higher price point because you're going to reach a different kind of audience, but it can cut costs because you aren't using that extra bleach and going through the bleaching process to try to take out those impurities and the differentiations in color from the recycled materials. The second issue is a huge carrying cost for titles that have to be printed prior to release and held. So in the case of Stephen King and Owen King, Stephen King's name is huge. Any novel he puts out is going to be in instant demand. So you've got to create thousands and thousands and thousands of copies of this novel and hold it for the day of distribution. So being able to have that huge carrying cost in one warehouse or two smaller warehouses is really, really not a great solution. My specific suggestion, is to utilize the EDI system more effectively to only print what is necessary or actually ordered. So ensuring that, yes, you are still forecasting, you are still trying to determine what your future sales are going to be, but utilizing the EDI system and the orders that you get in order to determine what your actual print run should be, that's going to be fantastic for cutting down on those carrying costs. And as we'll see in the distribution section, being able to ship those out in small batches is probably much more cost effective than having to hold these and try to ship them all at once at the same time so that you can reach everybody across the country for release date. So another issue that I saw was that production runs are palletized, warehoused, and then unpalletized, picked, repacked, and distributed. So in order to solve this problem, packing should be done as the product exits the production line to avoid the multiple people touching this product in the process. So instead of running the machines, creating the novel, having them palletized, having that EDI in with the manufacturing process, getting that manufacturer's order, so being able to say that Amazon wants 4,000 copies of this novel, go ahead, palletize those for Amazon right there, label them, get them ready. That way you don't have to do anything but put them on the truck when the time comes to ship them out. That way you're not putting up the product, taking it back out, picking it, repalletizing it, relabeling it, and then taking it and shipping it out. Again, in the distribution channel, we still have that issue of the multiple touches in the picking and packing process. And so in order to get this, packing at the end of the production run based on the EDI order, it cuts down on the handling costs. There are fewer carrying costs, especially if once those orders are done and you can pack them at the end of the run, maybe you move them directly onto a truck and have them shipped out. So you have fewer carrying costs. Fewer carrying costs is always great. And those orders can be shipped more frequently, therefore they can be out in the hands of the people who need them rather than sitting in a warehouse. And again, this is probably, I think, the biggest issue that I see with the Simon & Schuster distribution channel. It's the fact that they only have the one distribution warehouse and the fact that it's located in Riverside, New Jersey. Now, Riverside in itself is not horrible. It's not a bad place to be. However, it is as far east as you can possibly get. They do have a separate storage warehouse in Bristol, PA, which provides backup storage to support Riverside, but there's no distribution from the Bristol, PA warehouse. So if they need to distribute, they have to go get it from Bristol, bring it back to Riverside, and then distribute it. And that is just time wasting in and of itself. Because of this, because of the one warehouse, there is excessively long shipping times to the West Coast. Comparison of 5 days on the East Coast, 17 days on the West Coast. This creates higher carrying costs and higher shipping costs. More concerning is there's a higher evidence or higher likelihood of stockouts for the West Coast vendors. You know, if you can't get that supply in, then you're stuck for 17 days. What if you run out, you're stuck for 17 days waiting for new supply to come in? And the tamper-evident tape really decries theft and tampering problems. So once those are solved, I think that that's going to be a much better solution for the people at Simon & Schuster. So in order to solve this, I really thought about two potential solutions. The first is to build an additional warehouse on the West Coast or somewhere west of the Mississippi. In that case, transportation cost decreases, but inventory cost increases because you're having to store more inventory in two different places. However, your transportation cost decreases greatly because you're transporting from two different locations closer to the source. I believe there's less likelihood of tampering and theft because there's fewer stops on a route from, let's say, Nevada to California than there are from New Jersey to California. And there are fewer stockouts as orders can be shipped faster and more timely, and so there's very, very few days between orders and back orders rather than having a stock out for a very long time. The second solution I thought about was finding and utilizing a faster, better shipping method. Right now, every method that they offer for shipping is either less than truckload or UPS. If they had full containerized shipping and they utilized cross-docking, maybe that would be a better idea because they would not have the stops, they would not have the starts of less than truckload, and they wouldn't have the halts of UPS. So UPS takes a long time because they have to go through getting off the plane, getting on the plane, getting on the truck, getting off the truck, ground, all of those things. That creates stops and starts and takes extra time to get that product to you. If you had a full containerized shipping that went direct from the factory in New Jersey or warehouse in New Jersey to a cross-docking warehouse somewhere in the West, somewhere in the Midwest, and then it was loaded onto the LTL or UPS, that would be a perfect situation to be able to have no stops in between and get those out. I'm hoping that that could cut off 5 to 10 days of the process of shipping. Sales, return, and recycling don't have as many issues as the distribution channel does. Distribution has a lot of issues in this supply channel, but the sales, return, and recycling really don't. One of the ones that I thought was interesting was that retailers tend to re-barcode the products once they're received. So let's say Barnes & Noble has their own barcoding system that they put a sticker over top of the barcode that is on the book. Well, in order to kind of cut down on that and to cut down on that time and that expense of re-barcoding everything, why not work with the retailers to put their barcodes on during manufacturing? That could be an added expense charged to the retailer, but it could add extra income for the distributor, for Simon & Schuster, and cut down on the cost for the retailer and the time needed by staff for the retailer. The other issue, and simply put, is excessive returns. You know, if you've got a book that keeps coming back over and over again, that's excessively returning that novel back to the publisher, back to the distributor. If that novel is coming back from lots of different places, then better forecasting is needed. And I understand that in the book sales world, that is very difficult to forecast, extremely difficult. Because again, you don't know what book's going to be picked up by what celebrity. You don't know who's going to be talking about what on the radio. But there's got to be better forecasting based on, say, pre-order numbers. Using client POS data to forecast future sales can also be vital. In this case, people were worried that because Owen King's name was on this novel, that it would not be as successful as if Stephen King had written it just himself. As Stephen King has done several collaborations in the past, one or two of which were not as successful. But in this case, this novel was successful. It came out and it became an instant bestseller. Having a warehouse closer to the retailer can help with stockouts. And instead of having those returns come back to the warehouse, they just divert those returns to oversold retailers. So if I'm a small independent bookseller and I ordered 50 copies, but really I can only sell 10, and I'm sending those 40 back, then maybe Amazon needs those 40. Maybe they can, instead of coming back to the warehouse, go directly to Amazon and cut out the middleman, so that return process is not excessive and does not keep going in a cycle. So in conclusion, we have a physical supply chain and a creative supply chain leading to sales, and then final distribution and recycling. And as far as the solutions to issues, I believe firmly that closer warehousing is one of the biggest saviors in this entire process. If a closer warehouse to the end customer on the West Coast could be established, that would be one of the best decisions that Simon and Schuster could make. Fewer product touches are necessary. Instead of manufacturing and then storing and then re-picking and repacking, redirected returns, I think, is a vital, instead of having that return come directly to you, have it go directly to the next vendor that needs those pieces of novel, needs those goods coming to them. Reduction in shipping times, again, goes with the closer warehousing or potentially with a cross-docking operation. And reduce theft and tampering. That way you don't need that tamper evident tape. The next 3 slides are copies of my references. They are also on the APA formatted paper that I've done to go along with this presentation. "50 minutes later, thank you very much. I'm sorry I did not realize it would take that long. Um, Again, Crystal Hypes, MBE 580, Supply Chain Management. And this is the supply chain analysis of Sleeping Beauties by Stephen King and Owen King. I've really enjoyed this class, and I want to say thank you for the opportunity to learn from you. I hope you have a great weekend.